Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bronwyn Katarski, and I'm an assessment consultant here at Riverside Insights. I work with Ohio schools and districts, and I will be your host for today's webinar. And first, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. And basically, what we're doing here today is we're going to be discussing, focusing on strategies and best practices with ensuring your students and how we can know that they're ready for algebra so that they can successfully complete the course, pass, and do well on the end of course assessment. And we want them to meet one of the math requirements to graduate school or high school in Ohio. We also want students to be confident in math, so we'll be talking about that as well. First, I'd like to introduce Scott Bloom from Piqua City Schools. He's joining us today, as well as a few other colleagues. But before I introduce them, we just have a few announcements to share. And so I'm going to let Allison take this part.
Sure. Hi, everyone. During today's session, you may have some questions that you would like one of us to answer. So we definitely welcome those questions. Please type those into the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. It's going to look on the right-hand side. Bronwyn, if you want to advance.
Absolutely. Oh, sorry.
It's going to look right here on the
ourselves. So
keep going on the left side of your screen. So we will be sure to share your questions as the topic arises today during the discussion. There are a few handouts as well. Wanted to share that. Those are located under the handouts triangle on the right-hand side panel of your screen. So be sure to download those two handouts during the webinar. And today's session is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the recording and the slides, as well as the handouts and a certificate of attendance in the next day or two. So be on the lookout for that in your inbox.
Okay.
Also,
oh, sorry.
There's the handouts. All right. Also, please join us on Thursday, February the 22nd at 12 o'clock for our next webinar featuring Rachel Dobney. She is from Dublin City Schools here in Ohio. So Rachel will be sharing about a data-driven process to equitably identify students who are gifted and talented. She's also going to discuss the approach that their district takes to meet their students' needs. And the link to register for that webinar is in the chat. So you can find that there. All right, so now on to today's discussion.
Great. All right. Well, we are thrilled that we have Scott Bloom with us here today. He is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction for Piqua City Schools, grades 6 through 12. And Scott, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to our audience before we keep going.
Sure. So good afternoon. My name is Scott Bloom. I'm our curriculum director here for the district, nominally 6 through 12, but we tend to overlap and help out wherever we're really needed. So as the curriculum director, we're really working with all the different facets of instruction, and whether that is math, language arts, we get to do the full spectrum of that. So one of the tools that we've used in our junior high, especially we're going to talk about today, is the math assessment through Iowa. So we're really excited to be able to kind of bring that to everybody here and how we utilize all of the things that it can do.
Great. Scott, we thank you for being here. And also, I just want to welcome all the administrators in the state of Ohio that are joining us today as well. We really appreciate you being a part of this discussion. All right, so to get us started, Scott, can you share a little bit about your district, you know, where it's located in Ohio, sure, how many students and that kind of thing, grade levels?
Absolutely. So we are Piqua, Ohio, southwest corner of the state in Miami County. If you know where Dayton is and Columbus and Cincinnati, we kind of form one of the points of that triangle. Our population is right around 21 to 22,000. We're a mix of suburban and rural households. I mean, we are look Piqua City, but if you drive 10 minutes in any direction here, you are in some sort of agricultural field. So, you know, we really have the full spectrum there. We are at the intersection of Interstate 75 and 70. So we have a lot of interstate travel, and we're a bustling region for manufacturing and aviation, lots of different things going on here. So our district, we're a little over 3,000 students, anywhere between 3,200 and 3,500, depending on our enrollment. We do have 5 schools in the district. We have 2 elementaries, a 4 through 6 building, a 7-8, and then a high school. We are affiliated with the Upper Valley Career Centers, which is almost next door to our high school. So all of our career-focused students will go there. We offer a wide range of sports programming. It's listed here. We're well known for our show choir. They're recognized across this part of the country as examples of fantastic performances by kids. We offer K through 3 STEM programming for all students. So those kids can all work with different kinds of learning and everything from robotics to programming for them. We even have esports here for our students. So we now have an esports arena at our high school for students who are on our esports team. So we offer a wide range of opportunities for our students.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So Scott, can you kind of discuss exactly what does a successful graduate look like from a math perspective
Sure.
at Piqua City?
So one of our core beliefs here is that success-bound program and progress and plan for a student, where we work from the slide shows from the freshman year up, but we actually start to talk about this with kids from kindergarten, what it means to be success-bound. So if you would go into our elementaries, you would see a display that looks very similar to the one that you have on the slide here that would really reinforce what's important for those students in K3 or 4-6 and so on. So from the mathematics realm, to be success-bound, we want our students to be proficient in algebra or geometry in the freshman year. We do have both of those that take place at our high school. Some of our algebra students complete that requirement as 8th graders. We're going to talk about that today. As the sophomore year, we have geometry, or they could be in Algebra 2. We do offer 2 of the 3 Algebra 2 equivalent math pathway courses here at Piqua High School. We offer qualitative reasoning or data science or modeling, and then we offer data science. So we actually have 3 Algebra 2 pathways for students to take. And then post Algebra 2, we offer a wide gamut of different courses. We offer everything from calculus and pre-calculus to stats, just a number of different things that students can pursue based on their success-bound plan and where they want to go as they graduate from high school.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, please continue.
Okay, so if it's okay, let's take a step back from our high schoolers for a minute and let's talk about your 7th grade students. Do all your 7th grade students take, a specified test such as IAAT to get placed into Algebra 1?
So the way that we do this is right now we have a compacted math course for students who are interested in taking Algebra 1 as an 8th grader. This is not for all students at this point in time. Roughly 100, maybe a few more students per year take advantage of that program. We follow the basic pathway of the Ohio 3 years and 2 math program. So we are working to cover 7th grade, 8th grade, and algebra standards for those students who choose to take that pathway. So as a 7th grader, students in this program will take a compacted set of standards. We will cover 7th and 8th in that course. And this is where the IAAT really comes into play, because what it does is it allows us to identify at the end of that compacted math program, identify strengths for the students. So we know as they head into 8th grade as an algebra student, what we can continue to focus on. It also provides us with information about areas that might need some just some spiraling back to them, because that is a lot of math standards, a great deal of them in 1 year. So we share that with our algebra teachers in our 8th grade year so that they can really customize the instruction that students receive based on partly based on those results. We have found that it does help us to understand the picture for each of those students as they're headed into algebra, and it really doesn't help us to increase their pathway to success. Typically, with our 8th grade algebra students, we see almost 100% passage on the Ohio end of course exam. I think out of roughly 90 students last year, we maybe had 2 who did not meet the proficient indicator. 100% of our students met the competent indicator. So that meant that all of the students who were in our algebra pathway met that graduation requirement for Ohio. They have their Algebra 1 credential completed. And this information from this assessment really does help us focus that instruction for those students.
Great. No, and so I think that's great. You've got 8th graders, some 8th graders that are taking Algebra 1.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about your 9th graders. How do you prepare students for algebra if they're going to be taking it in 9th grade?
So what our plan is they are all taking the 8th grade standards. They're what would be considered more of a typical math pathway. Now, we haven't used this assessment with them yet. That's the plan, so that we can start to help identify the exact same type of strengths and areas that need some refocus for our 9th grade math teachers. What we have identified is that success in Algebra 1 during that first year, whether it be 8th grade or 9th grade, is really a strong indicator for success throughout high school. We do not want our students to become kind of deficient in that Algebra 1 area. It just sets their success-bound paths kind of off their timeline. So we work really hard to make sure that those students are receiving as much customized, differentiated instruction as we can, and this assessment can help with that.
Great. And maybe you can kind of tell me a little bit about your past processes, like before you got to, this process.
Sure.
Basically, I guess I'm wondering, how did you know which students were ready for algebra prior to this process?
Well, that's a good question, because we did use a number of criteria, 6th grade criteria coming out of into the 7th grade year. We use state testing as an indicator, which is okay. It does provide some information, but it's not nearly as focused on some of the foundational skills that are required for algebra success. We would use teacher recommendations before that. We would use some growth measure assessments that we use here in the district. The real difference is that this particular assessment really pinpoints those areas that are specific to algebra,
Mm-hmm.
but that are very focused on the skills that the students will need to be successful in an algebra classroom. That an algebra teacher would often assume that the student has when they get to that class, because these are all prerequisites for those students. Again, compacting that 7th and 8th grade year is a lot. I mean, even for students who are really excited about math and who have voluntarily decided to do this, that is still a lot of standards. And it can, if we're not careful, it can be easy to lose some of those standards in that instruction. So this helps us to refocus that.
Great. What was the tipping point where you decided that you needed a new process?
We were starting to see students who got to algebra, and we were having to do remediation in instruction, meaning we were missing some of the foundational skills they needed to move forward. And we realized that because of the number of standards that we were using, we weren't completely sure as to exactly which ones the kids were missing. So this process really did allow us to identify what we needed to provide for them as they moved to that 8th grade year and embarked on that algebra journey. So once we started to see that, we realized we need to see this in a much more granular way. We needed to see specifically which part of those 2 years of standards we needed to strengthen for those students, mm-hmm. and which we needed to provide those teachers with that information so that they can work with those students directly.
Great.
Typically for the students, it is, I just need to maybe brush up on a standard or revisit it so that they can be successful in the algebra classroom.
Great. So in starting this new process, I'm just kind of curious. Aside from what the process looks like, who all is involved on your team, and can you talk about the benefits?
Sure. There is myself, of course, and then the building principal is a vital part of this teamwork. We work closely together to work with both the teachers and with that information for those students. So when we are giving this assessment, the principal and I will work closely together on that. And then, of course, the teachers are the most vital part of the team, because at the end of the day, I can prepare the assessments and do everything. They're the ones who do the heavy work of instruction. So we work with both our 7th grade teachers who are instructing the compacted class, as well as our 8th grade algebra teachers, so that the information that we are able to obtain from the Iowa assessment, we are able to share that in the hands of our 8th grade algebra teachers before this year is even over. So we will have that late May for them. So as they're looking at class lists and they're looking at students who are coming to them, they can already start to plan, okay, maybe here's a standard that we needed more time on in that 7th grade year. They can already start to plan, where can I reinforce that in my pacing? Where can I reinforce that next year in that instruction, so that they already have a map for the students that are coming to them to be able to work on those things that need a little bit of attention.
Great, great. And I know you all used to administer this test as in its paper pencil form, which is still an option. What made you guys decide to switch to the online format?
Well, the first year we did it was the paper form, and I'll be honest, I don't hate the paper form. Sometimes it's nice to not plug anything in or have a screen in front of you, but I had to hand score those, and that takes a little bit of time.
Sure.
And I found that the data was a lot easier to work with our teachers when we did it in the online version. I mean, it's fair, it's really quick, it's really fast. I'm not scoring it, which is fine, but the information is much easier to utilize that we get from that. It's deeper. Of course, the reporting's deeper. I mean, there's a lot more to it, and I can get it more quickly and then disseminate that to our teachers. So just like many of the assessment systems we use in Ohio, that ability to see not just their results, but to analyze those results and make instructional decisions on that, we're faster and more complete, I believe, with the online version.
Right.
And the students, I'll face it, are used to using an online assessment. I mean, all the state assessments are online. This isn't something that they're unfamiliar with.
Sure, absolutely. And how does this assessment, the IAAT, how does it inform the decisions that you make at the district level and the school level?
Sure. So there are a lot of pieces of data that come from this. So what we're able to, we use it for a number of different uses. Of course, we're looking at student success, student achievement, strengths for students, and we are using that directly with our instructors as they move to algebra. So we can look down all the way down to a granular level with each of the students to identify their strengths, areas that need reinforcement, their readiness for algebra. We can really get a really solid picture of that student when it comes to algebra readiness as they move into the algebra arena. So on that level, I think what most people would typically think of when they're using any kind of assessment results, everything from readiness down to the different parts of algebra, we can see how the students are doing. A little bit bigger picture, maybe one step up, is we use that to really evaluate our compacted course. You have to imagine that's a lot of standards to fit into a year. We're moving very quickly with that. So what that allows us to do with that, with those results, is we can look for areas that are showing up with less achievement for the students. Maybe we're seeing this in a part of the equation or number sense or things like that. So we'll take that information and then revisit our pacing guides and our own curriculum maps and take a look at that and say, okay, what did this really look like in real time when we actually were using this for instruction? what might have resulted in more students than we wanted to, showing not as much growth in that area or not as much strength in that area. So we use it to revise not only the students, of course, but revise our own pacing, our own maps with the teachers, and analyze that, and then refocus how we instruct. So we use it on a couple of different levels with the entire math spectrum.
Great. Okay, thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
And I know Rita is going to be giving us some context on, a little more context on IAAT.
Yep.
Yes, thanks, Scott, for explaining why you guys are using it. A lot of people, though, do use it for the fact that it was a good reputation. It was developed at the University of Iowa by leading mathematicians and people who have that experience in math education research. It's nationally normed specifically for students in grades 6, 7, and 8. There is a high correlation of Algebra 1 course grades, and I'll talk a little bit about that more, and how that composite score predicts really how that student is going to succeed in that first year in that algebra class. And it's important to know that if a student's ready, just kind of like Scott said, because it really depends on their success in high school, if they're ready for algebra and if they have those problem solving and critical thinking skills necessary to be successful. So if they have those necessary skills in algebra, they're more likely to graduate high school. And when Algebra 1 is taken, really determines the highest attainable math course in high school. It is administered in the group setting. It only takes 40 minutes. And like Bronwyn had already mentioned, and Scott mentioned, at first they did paper. It's available paper, pencil, or even online. And there's a lot of reports that are available, especially with the online, as Scott also mentioned, with getting, being able to examine more the impact of how it is with classes and programs for algebra readiness, and kind of assist with developing class goals and those placement decisions.
And I will add that one class period is really important, that 40 minutes, because that fits in most traditional course or days for schools. We have found that multiple day assessments, we do pretty well on the first day. The second day, we tend to, these are 7th graders, so they drift a little by the second day of the assessment. So being able to do it in one day is really, really, really helpful.
Sorry, guys, I realized I went on mute, but I appreciate you bringing that up, Scott, because frankly, I've worked with middle schoolers and I know exactly what you're describing when you talk about losing them that second day. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Okay. Oops. All right. And I know Tina's going to be sharing some more information about this as well.
So just to build on what Rita already started talking about, another reason to administer the IAAT is because when we're looking at most achievement tests, those are going to be aligned to grade-specific content standards. But with the Iowa Algebra test, it was designed to assess skills that are acquired over multiple grades and that are skills that are fundamental to algebra success. So it's going to assess not just the algebraic skills, but the skills that are fundamental to that success. Another thing, like Scott mentioned earlier, when we're looking at state summative tests like you used to do, that's great information to have. But those measure standards and concepts that are specific to each grade level, and they're more general to content alignment. And what the Iowa Algebra test focuses on is the desired outcome, which is going to be success in algebra. And we identify the foundational skills that are necessary prerequisites to have that success. So you really can target who's algebra ready, and teachers can differentiate instruction. And Scott, I just have to say, I love that not only are you using this information with your teachers, but you're using it for your pacing guides and to look at things across the board. So that's really amazing.
Absolutely.
We have found that it helps more even than the state assessments, because you're right, those are on standard, which are great, but they're not as foundational as maybe some of the questions here. So it really helps us guide our own instruction.
Great, thank you.
And
And I know, Rita, can you tell us a little bit about the scores on the IAAT?
yes, I'm actually going to talk a little bit, Tina will talk a little bit more about the scores. I'm going to talk about the different parts, because that's really the key, and like what Scott was saying about knowing what to focus on and the diagnosis of student strengths and weaknesses is because there are 4 parts and you're able to compare the scores in those 4 parts. So part 1 of the assessment is called the pre-algebraic number skills and concepts. And that's going to measure a student's understanding of those foundational skills needed to be prepared for algebra. And those questions assess computation skills, working with integers and variables, and the ability to problem solve. So IAT captures basic arithmetic, and the items in part 1 are most often aligned with the numbers and operations, since it's nicely aligned with NCTM. Part 2 is called then the interpreting mathematical information. And that's going to measure a student's ability to read the graphs, interpret given information, apply those math concepts using words and symbols. And then after each graph or definition is usually presented, the students are asked a question that's going to test their understanding of what they've read. So this section often aligns with standards in expressions and equations, and the standards in operations and algebra thinking. Unlike part 1, where the knowledge of fundamental skills and concepts are tested, part 2 is going to require more generalized knowledge of math and how it's applied. Part 3 is called the representing relationships, and that assesses how well students can find formulas for numeric relationships. So some of the items there are presented in table form, and the students will find the rule for that relationship. So these rules involve sometimes 4 arithmetic operations, adding positive and negative numbers. Other items might measure how students interpret and represent those relationships with the information presented. And then the remaining items in this part measure how well students interpret and represent that relationships from information presented in that verbal, graphic, or symbolic form. And then last but not least is part 4, and that's called using symbols. And concepts tested include variables, orders of operations, consecutive integers, how changes in the value of one variable in an equation can affect the values of another. Some were written specifically to test whether a student has an algebraic misconception about variables or equations or integers, all that good fun math stuff, and then many of the items have very high discrimination indices, indicating that the better the students nearly respond correctly, the weaker students in algebra will respond incorrectly. So the results from the test really reinforce the research findings, suggesting what a powerful indicator the IAT is for success in algebra. So part 4 is not an algebra test, just like part 1 isn't a pre-algebra test. Taken together, the 4 parts are going to demonstrate a student's readiness for that overall coursework.
Great. All right, and Scott, I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about, the systems you have in place to analyze the data from IAAT.
So we do, I can see it up on the screen there. We use the Ohio model for teacher-based teams, TBTs. If you ever are in Ohio, teachers and administrators will know what those are. Our teacher-based teams meet throughout the year. In the case of our junior high, 7th and 8th grade math teams, once every 2 weeks. We will analyze a wide range of student information. It can range from state assessments to local growth measure assessments to this. That teacher-based team will look at student data. That we will look at sometimes pre-post or whatever we've done in that interim. Those teacher teams will then identify strategies that would be successful to meet what they're seeing in that data. And then we'll put those strategies into action The next time we meet, we'll look at the effectiveness, whether we keep it, adapt it, change it, and that continues throughout the year. So what we'll do with this information, albeit it's in May, we don't quit instruction just because it's in May. So we work. There are those who would advocate for that. If you ask the 7th graders and the 8th graders, but we still keep we keep going. So our teacher-based teams continue to look at those scores and they are that data and still continue to identify ways to help those students. So that is embedded in our culture here. So adding this is not something that is out of the ordinary. In fact, our teachers are really adept at using data for that kind of purpose. We put it into action. So our teaching does change in response to what the students are doing. We do look at NCEs. Those are, if you're a state assessment person, think of them as percentiles. We look at those percentiles so that we can see how our students are doing, whether they're growing. We always want to see them growing in their strengths and gaining percentiles that way. We do look at that readiness score. That's a big one that helps us know, okay, this student is likely to be successful in algebra, so that we can identify those pieces. And then much like we were just talking about, we do look at those sub areas with this. And do we see any areas that we need to help strengthen with those students as they move into algebra? That really helps a great deal. So we can identify specifically what that student might need. So weave all of that together, and we've got very strong teacher teams who can use student information, analyze it well, and then turn it into effective practice, which is what we really want this to do.
Right. No, absolutely. Is there a required score that students have to earn in order to get placed in Algebra 1?
We haven't set that, and I'll be honest. The majority of students here are meeting that. What we see more are areas. We'll see areas that maybe aren't as high as others, but we're not really using it to discourage any students from coming through that. Most of them in this compacted course, this compacted math, are algebra ready. They're prepared for that. Now, if we had a student that completely was not ready, we could always adjust that as well and say, okay, you know what, I think 8th grade would be a better, let's revisit all of those standards for them. But if you look at the information that the assessment gives, there are readiness scores that range from yes, I am to no, I'm not quite yet. And you could use that to identify students who need further support in instruction. For 8th graders, you have to remember their next course in sequence is typically Algebra 1. So we are sending them to Algebra 1. So what we use that for students who are going to Algebra 1 from the junior high is to identify those areas that need some reinforcement so that they are successful when they get to that course.
Right. Tell me a little bit more about, do you use personalized learning to help those students that may need some additional support, or basically how this affects supporting those students along the same lines as your classroom and instructional decisions?
Sure, that is a good question. Always there's a concept of time when it comes to instruction during the school day. If you ask my math teachers, we should teach math 7 hours a day, but I can't really do that. I've tried, and there was a small revolt from the kids. So we have to adjust that. What we have done for the junior high, and we do it for the high school as well, we do have what many schools call it advisory periods, or you name it, homerooms. They had all kinds of names, but we have a 20 to 30 minute period per day where students meet with a specific teacher. Maybe they do homework. I mean, it just depends. So what we've done specifically at the junior high is we have identified those students who can use further exposure to skills or standards. And it could be a wide range of things, but we have their advisory with their math teachers. So what happens is they are able to work with the actual instructors they have during the day, specifically on maybe it is those pre-algebra number skills, or maybe it is those symbols, or number sense. But those teachers will have an idea of what they need to work on, and they will help work on those specific skills. That way we can, during the actual math course during the day, focus on standards-based instruction. Because what we have found is if we're not careful, the students get further behind on standards because we're trying to constantly catch up in a 45-minute period. We've just carved out time to work on those areas that need reinforcement. We do the same with the high school. It just looks a little different because we have kids in all over the different courses that need it, but they will typically work with an algebra instructor or a geometry instructor to help reinforce those areas. It's very focused on what the students need to work on.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And Tina, can you give us a little bit more information about the scores?
Sure. Can I just say I wish I was a student at your school, Scott, because I probably would have done much better in math if somebody would have taken the time like that instead of just making me do it all in my math class. So Scott was just talking about all the scores that they use to identify students. So we're just going to quick summarize what is available on the IAAT. So your students are going to receive a score on all of those 4 individual sections that Rita talked about a few minutes ago. And then they're also going to receive a composite score as well. So the scores that are available include a raw score, a standard score, your percentile rank, a Stanine score, and a normal curve equivalent. We also have national scores to give you another point of comparison for your students. And as Scott has been talking about, all of these scores combined can provide you with a quick view of a student's algebra readiness skills, but its main use is to inform that algebra placement. And so when you're looking at these and considering algebra acceleration or remediation, the combination of individual scores along with that composite score gives you a full picture of your student.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. And I think we're going to move on and talk about the algebra readiness factor as well.
Right. So with the algebra readiness, statistically, again, it's well researched. So it has been shown that the correlation of algebra readiness is 0.84 for exam grades, 0.75 for semester grades, and 0.98 for the IAT. And the algebra readiness factor has that highest correlation with the IAT at 0.98, which isn't surprising because the IAT was designed to measure algebra readiness. And the correlations with those end of semester grades is lowest, usually because grades are influenced by many non-cognitive and behavioral factors that can't be predicted. And I'm bringing this up just because this really demonstrates that the readiness factor is a great predictor of those future learning in algebra. And the difference between IAT and exam grades is attributable to like those new algebra skills that students learn. So looking at the grades a little bit further, we're gonna move on and I'm gonna just show you a little graph here where on that graph, the higher IAT scores have been consistently found to be associated with higher algebra grades. So the x-axis there on the graph shows your course grades in algebra. The y-axis shows the scores on the IAT, and those who scored higher on the assessment performed better in algebra class. So the table, again, is just additional evidence regarding the relationship between those algebra grades. So in Piqua, they're really looking at it to help build and focus on what is being delivered based on where students need more exposure. Sometimes a lot of districts might use it though to see who is ready for algebra, and they'll kind of use a placement, and sometimes using that standard score and comparing it to a grade level gives them an idea on like what that cut score is. So the values in the table are percentages, and if 89 students earned, for example, a score of 180 to 199 on the IAT, 53% of them, according to that little graph, is received an A, 28% received a B. And you can see that IAT scores of 160 and above are associated overall with success in algebra. And again, success we consider at a C or better, that might not be the same for everybody. So the bottom score intervals are associated just with lower grades. And really that relationship at the content domain level was examined, and a similar strong relationship existed between the domains and course grades, particularly in that interpreting mathematical information section or part in the test itself.
Great. All right. Thank you, Rita. I think we're going to go into the report in a little bit more depth now.
So you've heard Scott talking about how they're using the reports and the data to determine what the students need to know and for differentiation. And so this, I'm guessing, Scott, is one of the reports that you use. This, as a classroom teacher myself, this is one of my favorite reports, and I love this for so many reasons. But what you can see on here is, first of all, you can see how your students answered each one of these questions, and it shows the standard that it's aligned to. It shows how the question was answered. If there's a little dot, that means they answered the question correctly. Where you see the letter, that is the incorrect answer that the student chose. So you can really quickly go through your class and see, like, wow, a lot of my students answered this incorrectly. Maybe I need to go back and reteach my entire class, or maybe I just need to pull a few kids aside and go back over this. The other thing that I really love about this report is if you look at the bottom, you see that most common distractor. So was there a question on that particular, was there an option on that particular question that the kids chose instead of the right one consistently over and over again? What was the distractor? And, you know, if it's a pretty small percentage of my class, maybe I just might want to mention that. But if I have a large percentage of my class that chose that common distractor over and over again, I might want to go back and say, hey, what tripped us up on this question? What was the language that was used? How can we clarify that so it doesn't happen again? And so you said you use this, Scott, a lot in your teacher-based teams. So this is one of those reports that shows you specifically how your students are answering, the percentage they got correct, and what's throwing them off on the test. So this is something I, as a teacher, would have used while I was planning my differentiated instruction with my teammates.
Great, thank you so much. And I think, well, we're going to talk a little bit more about the individual student performance report as well.
Yes, the individual student performance report online, it shows a summary of the student's overall score on the assessment, and then where their location is based on an achievement level or performance standard. And then the lower section of the report, it will talk about what standard was assessed, how many questions are aligning to that standard. And then in the next column, you can kind of see the overall class performance, what that class average was earned on each assessment, along with the number of correct items answered. And on a lower, even further, you can dig down and see the question number, click on it and see the question itself, the correct answer. So it's very informative also for guiding and focusing, as Scott has mentioned. Scott, if I can ask, what report do you guys usually focus on? Is there a report that you maybe send home? Mm-hmm.
You know what? I don't know that we've sent them all home. That's a really good idea. I need to check with the teachers, but we use this one a lot. So far, specifically, again, because we're looking at how those students are getting ready for that algebra year. But we also use the one before that that you showed. So those are actually two of the big ones because they're I'm going to say this in a nice way, they're the fastest. I can get the most information to our teachers in a short amount of time. So when we looked at those, we can see right away if there's a student who needs something. As you said, if there is an area that we did not touch on, we'll know right away when we see lots of reds in that area, or we see the same distractor being chosen. We'll know that. So those are two of the biggies. I also use the NCE part myself, the growth part, because our state assessments are measured in NCEs, are part of it. So to me, that allows me to give some comparison and growth, which is helpful from my end. So I can start to see whether or not we're seeing that growth measure. Growth is a little different than achievement. So even students who maybe are struggling with parts of the math can still show growth. So that to me is an indicator of where I think our growth is going to be. So that part's a little bit helpful for me.
And I really like that you're also focusing on that growth part and looking at it. So thank you for sharing that portion, because you know, usually we're always focused on, there's two forms of the Iowa Algebra test, and you can use it as a pre or a post test and see that growth that way. But I like also how you're mentioning about that NCE. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And then Tina's going to talk to us a little bit just and show the report that if you're not online, what it looks like for paper pencil.
Well, and I just wanted to add one more comment too with those last two reports that we talked about. I'm sure this never happens at your school, Scott, but you get, where I was, we'd get the parents who would say, you're wrong, my student is totally ready and I know they're ready. That's great. Maybe they're close. This is exactly what they need to work on. If you want to get some outside tutoring for them, if there's something that you want to do outside of the school day that we're not already doing to make sure they're ready, here's what they need to know. And so that's a really great way to not only to sort of quiet those parents who are frustrated and think that their child is further along than they are, but also to bring them in as your partner and say, look, we would love to have your son or daughter be in our advanced class, but here's the skills they're missing. Help us out with that. And then, yep, I'm just going to talk about this quick because I know that we're coming on time here, but this is the ranked list of student scores report. And here you can see the student's raw score and the converted national percentile rank score for the test overall, and then for each section of the Iowa Algebra test. And just a side note, all of these reports can be exported to an Excel or a PDF format if that's something that you need in your school.
Okay. No, I'm glad you pointed that out, actually, Tina, because I know that's a very common thing where, educators would like to be able to export that to Excel. So thank you for that. Scott, I'm just going to ask you, just tell me what key insights have you discovered from your data analysis of IAAT?
That's a good question, because we're constantly exploring that as to our effectiveness, especially as we're using it now in a very, very accelerated pathway. We're well aware that 2 years of math instruction in one, that's a lot for students to take on. One of the big insights that we really picked up on is that we used to basically just skip one. Then this is years ago, but we would basically touch on bits of it, but we'd almost skip a full year. And one of the insights we found was that students were missing foundational skills that that they needed later on, and that were really hard to put back into place for them when they were into an advanced math course, even beyond algebra. So one of the insights that this has helped to reinforce is that compacting, even though it's a lot of standards at one time, is more effective for the students because they have those foundational skills that they will need to build on when they hit algebra or later on. Yes, it's faster, and yes, it's a lot more at one time, but they've been exposed to those standards and those skills, and that this is really helping us show that we're seeing them algebra ready even with that pace. So that's been really, really helpful. And again, it's really helped us to understand where our plan is, how effective it is. Because just like the students, we want to monitor their learning, we also monitor our own learning as instructors. How effective are we? And this has helped us to gain insight into that compacted class and how it's running and working for the students, and it's allowed us to modify as needed to help with that process.
Great. I have to echo what Tina said before. I really wish maybe I had been in Piqua when I was in middle school, especially.
Well, I have to say we have fantastic teachers who can do all of these things. I just help put it into place, but we have teachers who can handle all of this. So hats off to them. They do all the work. I just kind of show up and help them do stuff. So it's really them who drives all of this.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that with us. And guys, I know that sometimes funding sources can be challenging in terms of looking for, where's the money going to come from to, cover this particular assessment or, program. These are just some funding sources that are already listed on the Piqua City Schools website. So, again, Title I, looking at those academic needs of your, lower achieving, your lower income students. Title II, improving your teacher instruction, that professional development piece. Title IV, providing those enrichment activities for students. Expanding opportunities, so increasing the access to STEM and career-based opportunities. And of course, we don't want to forget IDEA, the services for students with disabilities. And on top of that, if you have local grants, and I know I spent a lot of time responding to local grants when I was still in a school district, so a little more time consuming, but that's also an option there. So before we wrap up today, I'm just kind of curious to find out if we have any questions that we have not been able to answer for folks today. And I'm going to ask my moderators to let me know if there have been any questions in the chat.
Well, there was a question about it being administered as a post-test, as opposed to identifying if students are ready, but then maybe after some of those skills have been remediated or taught to make sure that those students maybe a second time are tested.
Sure, I can speak that a little bit because we have some other assessment tools that we do pre and post, start of year, end of year. But if we didn't have that in place, you mentioned it earlier, Brian, when this is or maybe Rita did, you have an A and a B. They're parallel. So if you wanted to see that, you could do an A. I would do it within the first month or so of school, somewhere in there. And then you have the B. You could do both ends of that over the course of the year. And you would be able to compare the student's movement from A to B on that assessment after that instruction. I would say that more frequently than that, this probably wouldn't do that because you'll run out of opportunities to use it. But from a start to end, absolutely, I could see this being used for that.
Great, thank you. Moderators, do we have any other questions that might have come up?
I don't see any more.
Yeah, great job. Thank you, Scott, for all your input, because it was very informative, and we really appreciate the time and the energy and the focus that you're putting forth.
No, absolutely, you're welcome.
Absolutely. We'd like to thank everybody, especially Scott, for joining us again today. We're just about out of time, but please join us for future webinars. I know we talked a little bit earlier at the beginning about the webinar we have coming up soon with Dublin City. Please join us again for these. Be on the lookout for invites in your inbox soon. And really, I think I just want to leave everybody with some questions. How are you all using your assessment data at your school to support students with their learning? We don't want students to test just to test. Remember, no test ever changed a child's life. So how is the data that's being gathered impacting your decisions that you're making at your district or school level? So as you're walking through that, if you have success stories that you would like to share with us, any data meeting insights or assessment celebrations with your students, please feel free to tag us on social media. Let us know about those great things that are happening in your buildings. So before we wrap, is there anything that we need to cover yet? Anything else to add, ladies?
Not for me. I think I think you had enough of me today. That is for sure.
No, we very much appreciate your insights, Scott. So thank you again for sharing those with us.
You're welcome.
All right. And again, Scott, we'd like to thank you for joining us. And again, just, thank you to everybody who made time to join us. We hope to see you again for another webinar. And until next time, I hope all of you have a great rest of your day and a great week.